Every single one of these will unsettle a narcissist far more than any argument ever could. And the reason is almost funny once you understand it. None of them are attacks. They're just you, living your life, refusing to perform the role they need you to keep playing. Today, we're breaking down 10 specific things that reliably destabilize a narcissist, why each one works, and how to do them not as weapons, but as genuine acts of reclaiming your own life. Let's get into it. The first thing is simply not reacting. We've covered this at length in earlier episodes, but it deserves the top spot here because it's genuinely the foundation everything else builds on. A narcissist's entire operating system depends on being able to predict and provoke a response from you. Anger, tears, defensiveness, anything that confirms they still have access to your internal state. When you respond to provocation with calm, brief, emotionally neutral answers instead, you remove the one thing they were actually fishing for. This isn't about suppressing your feelings. It's about choosing not to hand over the specific currency they're trying to collect. The second thing is thriving visibly, without performing it for their benefit. This one is subtle, and it's important to get the distinction right. This isn't about posting a curated highlight reel designed to make them jealous, which is really just another form of engagement aimed at them. It's about actually building a life that's good, on your own terms, whether or not they ever see it. Genuine, unperformed happiness is uniquely destabilizing to a narcissist because it can't be explained by their usual framework. They expected their absence to cost you something, and evidence that it didn't. Evidence that was never actually manufactured for their benefit in the first place is much harder for them to dismiss than anything staged would be. The third thing is refusing to explain yourself. Most people, out of habit and a genuine desire to be understood, over-explain their decisions, their boundaries, their reasons for pulling back. With a narcissist, over-explanation hands them material, something to dissect, question, or twist. Simply stating a decision without justifying it at length, "I won't be attending that," instead of a paragraph of reasons, denies them the opening they're used to exploiting. The fourth thing is maintaining relationships with people they tried to isolate you from. This one tends to unsettle narcissists significantly, because their control has often depended, at least partly, on narrowing your world to reduce outside perspectives that might challenge their version of events. Quietly rebuilding those connections, reconnecting with the friend they dismissed, the family member they discouraged you from talking to, restores exactly the kind of outside counterbalance their control was designed to prevent. The fifth thing is documenting instead of debating. When you stop trying to convince them of the truth in the moment and instead simply keep your own accurate record, dates, specifics, your own memory intact and written down, you stop needing their agreement to know what's real. This matters because so much of a narcissist's influence relies on eroding your confidence in your own perception. A written record you trust, independent of whether they ever validate it, quietly removes their ability to keep you second-guessing yourself. The sixth thing is setting a boundary and following through on the consequence every single time, without negotiating it in the moment. Narcissists test boundaries reflexively, almost as a matter of course. It's not usually personal. It's simply what they do to every limit anyone sets. A boundary that holds consistently, without renegotiation, without an exception just this once, is far more destabilizing than a firmly worded boundary that eventually bends, because consistency removes the incentive to keep testing it. The seventh thing is being unreachable during their crisis moments, not out of cruelty, but because you're no longer available as an emotional first responder for a person who was never available in the same way for you. A narcissist who's used to your immediate, reliable concern will often escalate when that immediate response isn't there anymore, precisely because your availability had become something they'd stopped noticing as a gift and started treating as guaranteed. The eighth thing is succeeding in an area they specifically dismissed or discouraged. If they told you your career ambitions were unrealistic, your creative pursuits were a waste of time, your independence would leave you struggling, quietly proving otherwise, not as a performance aimed at them, but simply by continuing to build the thing they said wouldn't work, tends to be genuinely hard for them to metabolize, because it contradicts a story they needed to believe in order to maintain a sense of authority over your choices. The ninth thing is being kind to them without needing anything from them in return. Genuinely neutral, unbothered warmth, delivered without the old anxious eagerness to please. This one surprises people, because it seems counterintuitive that kindness could be destabilizing. But kindness offered from a place of total emotional independence, rather than a place of hoping to earn their approval, removes the specific dynamic they're used to operating within. They can't provoke a reaction from someone who's simply calmly pleasant and needs nothing back from them. The 10th thing is being fully, completely at peace with them finding out nothing at all about your life. Most people, even after significant distance, retain some quiet hope that the narcissist will eventually hear about their success, their happiness, their growth. Letting go of even that, genuinely not caring whether the information ever reaches them, is the final, most complete form of removing yourself from their narrative entirely. And it tends to be the most unsettling of all 10, precisely because it means you've stopped needing them as an audience for your life in any form, including as a witness to how well you're doing without them. I want to pause here and name something important, because I don't want this list to be misread as a strategy for revenge. None of these 10 things work because you're trying to make a narcissist suffer. They work because they're genuinely healthy, self-respecting ways of living, and it just happens that a narcissist's psychology is specifically destabilized by exactly the things that constitute a well-boundaried, self-possessed life. The unsettling effect on them is a byproduct, not the goal. The actual goal, the only one that matters here, is that you get to live this way regardless of whether it unsettles anyone at all. In part 2, we're going to walk through exactly how to put these 10 things into practice without slipping into performing them for the narcissist's benefit, which defeats the purpose entirely, plus what typically happens on their end once several of these compound together over time, and why the destabilization we've described today is really just a side effect of something much more important. You finally, fully belonging to yourself again. Stick around, because that part is where this becomes something you actually live, not just something you understand. Let's talk about how to actually live these 10 things without slipping into performing them, and what tends to happen when they compound over time. The distinction between doing these things for yourself and doing them for the narcissist's benefit is more subtle than it sounds, because the actions can look identical from the outside while being completely different in what's actually driving them. Here's the practical test. Ask yourself whether you'd still do this exact thing if you knew, with total certainty, that they would never find out about it. If the honest answer is yes, you'd still rebuild the friendship, still pursue the career, still hold the boundary, even in a world where they never witnessed any of it. You're doing it for yourself, and the destabilizing effect on them, if it ever reaches them at all, is genuinely a byproduct. If the honest answer is no, if some part of the motivation depends on them seeing it, knowing about it, or hearing about it secondhand, that's a sign the action has quietly become about them again, dressed up as self-respect. This matters enormously, because performing these 10 things for their benefit doesn't just fail to work as intended. It actually keeps you tethered to them in a way that genuine self-possession doesn't. A life built to be witnessed by someone still requires that someone has an audience, which means you haven't actually removed them from the equation. You've just changed the performance you're putting on for them. Real freedom from this dynamic looks less dramatic than that. It often looks like doing all 10 of these things quietly, consistently, without any of it ever reaching them at all, and being completely fine with that. Now, what tends to happen on their end once several of these compound together over time, because it's worth understanding the pattern, even though, as we just established, it shouldn't be the reason you're doing any of it. Individually, any one of these 10 things might not register as much more than a minor irritant to a narcissist. A single boundary held, a single friendship maintained despite their disapproval. But compounded together, over months and years, something more significant tends to happen. The narcissist loses what I'd call their operating model of you. Every narcissistic relationship runs on an internal prediction system, a model of how the other person will react, what they'll tolerate, how far they can be pushed before something breaks. When you consistently calmly decline to behave the way that model predicts, the model itself starts to fail, repeatedly, in ways that are genuinely disorienting for someone whose sense of control depends heavily on accurate prediction and management of the people around them. This is often when you'll see a narcissist's behavior become more erratic rather than less, not because you're doing anything different or more provocative, but because their usual toolkit, built around a version of you that no longer exists, keeps failing to produce the results it used to reliably produce. Rage that used to work doesn't land. Guilt that used to work doesn't land. Charm that used to work doesn't land. Eventually, as we discussed in an earlier episode, they may try the final tactic, flattering the very strength they can no longer break. And if even that fails, what's often left is a kind of confused, sometimes bitter withdrawal because they've genuinely run out of tools that work on the person you've become. I want to be honest about something here, because it's important context for anyone doing this work in real time. This process is rarely fast, and it's rarely linear. You won't do all 10 of these things once and watch a narcissist's world collapse in some dramatic, satisfying sequence. It's slower and quieter than that. Small, consistent choices made over an extended period that gradually stop reinforcing a dynamic that used to run on your predictable participation. Some days you'll do this perfectly. Other days, old patterns will resurface, and you'll find yourself explaining too much, or hoping they notice something, or feeling the old pull to manage their reaction. That's not failure. It's the actual, unglamorous texture of unlearning a dynamic that likely took years to build in the first place. Here's what I think is the real point underneath this entire two-part episode, and I want to state it plainly because I think it's easy to lose sight of after 10 items and a list of destabilizing effects. None of this is actually about them. The reason all 10 of these things unsettle a narcissist is that they are, each one, an act of a person fully belonging to themselves again, making decisions based on their own values, their own relationships, their own sense of what a good life looks like, entirely independent of whether it pleases, provokes, or even registers with someone who spent a long time needing you not to live that way. The destabilization is real, and for some people, understanding that it happens is genuinely, humanly satisfying after everything they went through. But it was never actually the goal. The goal was always just this: getting your whole self back and living as though the narcissist's reaction to that were beside the point, because it genuinely is. If you've already started doing some of these 10 things, quietly for yourself, whether or not it ever reaches them, I want you to know that's not a strategy working correctly. That's just you, living your actual life again. And that was always the entire point, independent of anything it does or doesn't do to anyone watching from the outside. If you want more of this, the real psychology underneath the behavior, and everything it takes to build a life that's genuinely, fully yours again, subscribe to Mind Horizon. I'll see you in the next one.